Giuseppe Verdi based La Traviata on Alexandre Dumas' 1852 play La Dame aux Camélias, The Lady of the Camellias. Dumas had chosen a somewhat autobiographical subject, based around the real courtesan Marie Duplessis, and in keeping with early realism, didn't conclude the story with an uplifting, moralizing lesson. To quote scholars Carolyn Abate and Roger Parker, Verdi wanted his opera, a first for Italian music drama, to evoke the modern metropolis, the ambivalent symbol of a progress whose blessings were mixed. To achieve this setting, Verdi used a number of devices, including the waltz, a dance symbolizing Romantic-era gallantry and scandal. The opera's first act conveys this urban but not quite urbane world, one energized by flirtation, passion, disappointment, betrayal, longing, and frivolity. And Verdi's protagonist, Violetta Valerie, embodies these catalyzing forces, a character anchored to pleasure, self-determination, and freedom, while consumed by tuberculosis and aspiring to something greater than her fragile world. My father often recounts the story of his maternal grandfather, who more than a century ago in Warsaw cried at the conclusion of Traviata each time he heard the opera. The emotional core of the story, after all, is Violetta, and I'd like to examine what makes her such a moving, intriguing, and complex figure. In the opera's opening instrumental prelude, Verdi's music embodies Violetta's melancholy, revealing the delicate pathos of a woman already ill and marginalized by a society that exploits and celebrates her body. Played pianissimo, extremely quietly, by strings and set in B minor, the prelude's tempo is adagio, slow and leisurely, as if to demonstrate Violetta's quietly private and already prolonged suffering. Indeed, we encounter her toward the end of her short life, as symbolized, by the way, by the giant clock ticking away her remaining time in director Willie Decker's 2005 production. Violetta's melancholy music recurs at the start of Act 3, but with more intensity and urgency, its key rising by one semitone to C minor, played pianissimo, not as quietly as in the prelude, and indicated andante, moderately slow, a tempo faster than adagio. Here, Violetta's illness is in its final stages and her death imminent. Opera composers are temporal architects in music and poetry, working to express narrative and character correspondences using motives, leitmotifs, and more deeply, keys. At music's superficial layer are motives and leitmotifs. Motives are melodic fragments that may be extended into leitmotifs, which are melodies that composers associate with characters, objects, places, and emotional states. These operate within tonality, the language of 18th and 19th century common practice in Western music. Tonality's alphabet, or repository of phonemes, pitches, is the diatonic scale. When the pitches of a scale are combined into melody and harmony, this is called a key, and keys communicate tension and resolution, or open-endedness and closure, through cadences. In common practice opera, at deeper structural layers, keys are islands that characters occupy, and how keys interact reveals meanings that often supplement and transcend the relative superficiality of characters' words and actions. One example of this is Verdi underscoring Violetta's encroaching fate by replaying the prelude's opening music one semitone higher at the start of Act 3. Going more in depth into this act, Violetta's first conversation with her doctor alludes to the final key of the opera, D-flat minor, when she assures him that although my body suffers, my spirit is serene. A priest comforted me yesterday evening. Religion is a relief to those who suffer. In the next moment, the key abruptly and temporarily shifts to A major when the doctor buoys Violetta's spirit with merciful lies, even though her case is hopeless. Why is this significant? It strikes me that Verdi distinguishes between Violetta's body and soul, using D-flat to represent her transient body and its physical death, and A major her eternal soul. But more on this later. D-flat returns later in the act when Violetta, fully accepting her fate, takes out a miniature and sings to Alfredo. Take this picture of my former days. Let it remind you again of her who loved you so. Alfredo protests, "You must live, my love. God didn't bring me here for such terrible torment." But she continues now in E major that if an innocent maiden should give her heart to you, let her be your bride. Give her this portrait. Tell her it's the gift of one who among the angels in heaven is praying for her, for you. At the words, "give her this portrait," the music returns to D-flat minor and then shifts to D-flat major when Violetta sings about sending prayers from heaven. As the key signifying Violetta's death, D-flat's early occurrences in the act offer an entirely musical preview of Violetta's imminent fate. For Verdi, among other 19th century opera composers such as Richard Wagner, music contained a truth unencumbered by the limitations of language. That is, music's abstraction and capacity to hold symbolic meaning made it the supreme romantic art, its power catalyzed by its disassociation from language's semantic and syntactic immediacy. At the opera's end, for example, the music telegraphs Violetta's sudden improvement before she tells her companions of her regained strength and illusory recovery, a medically possible occurrence at the end stages of tuberculosis that further confirms the correspondence between narrative and key. Her brief rapture is in A major, the key of her departing soul, in which she sings Alfredo's theme from the end of Act 1, "Love is the pulse of the universe." Shortly after she exclaims, "An unfamiliar strength stirs me, I am returning to life, oh joy!" the music abruptly slides into D-flat minor, and she dies. Violetta's last word, gioia, joy, alludes back to the very word she sings in a florid cadenza just before her famous exit aria, the sempre libera, always free cabaletta at the conclusion of Act 1. But the word's meaning is now transformed. Her joy is not in hedonistic pleasure and abandon, but in the hope of love fulfilled and sanctified through personal sacrifice. But what makes this more nuanced than a simple morality play is that Violetta is not legitimized into polite society while she appears healthy and still able to work as a courtesan, as is the case until Act 3. In the finale, abandoned, impoverished, and near death, Violetta is forced to accept her now radically altered circumstances. In classical tragedy, this would be peripeteia, the reversal of fortune that the protagonist must suffer to reach moral enlightenment. But in this narrative, her health and profession have been failing her since before the opera's start, and so her ultimate despair is unsurprising and unavoidable. Act 3 isn't a reversal, but the inevitable culmination of her personal tragedy. Notwithstanding her encroaching fate, Violetta is resilient. Until Act 3, she fights for personal autonomy, for the freedoms that demonstrate a progression of her soul's yearnings. In Act 1, she fights for the pleasures of hedonism within the rigid social constraints of courtesanship. Between Acts 1 and 2, she rather quickly decides to receive Alfredo's courtship and live a more acceptable life with him outside Paris. In Act 2, she fights to maintain the unglamorous domesticity enjoyed with Alfredo, but, at his father's entreaties, sacrifices her happiness to avoid further damaging the Germont family's reputation. By Act 3, then, Violetta fitfully submits to reality, having been unable to rise above her immediate and more existential conditions. As much as she fights to transcend her circumstances, she is, as the opera's name informs us, a Traviata, a fallen woman, pulled down by illness and the complex social marginalization engendered by her profession. This is the tragedy and realism of Violetta's story. Her path to social acceptance beyond her profession is through tremendous suffering. The redemptive meaning of Violetta's last word, gioia, is virtue in sacrifice. For Verdi, her trajectory symbolizes a kind of social martyrdom, pushing those around her to question the boundaries of conventional morality. For some, those questions come too late. Confronted with her mortality, Alfredo and his father are left devastated by their failure to recognize Violetta's innate and demonstrated merits. And to drive this point to its furthest reaches, Verdi sets the closing scene in D-flat minor, a spurious key in traditional Western music. It doesn't quite exist. What do I mean, it doesn't exist? The opera's closing D-flat minor music is real, we hear it. But in the same way we recognize phonetically familiar words that are, for whatever reason, misspelled, the D-flat minor key is sonically operational, but not semantically, in common practice tonality. Verdi's grammar violation is that the D-flat minor scale has 8 flats, one beyond the 7 maximum flats diatonic scales conventionally accommodate. The extra flat is in the tone B double flat, a pitch Verdi emphasizes repeatedly once Violetta dies. In her very final moments, though, Verdi spells this tone as a-natural to signify her emancipated spirit. Once martyred and redeemed, the a-natural transforms into its musical homophone B double flat, and the consequent D-flat minor key announces Violetta's death. This is the crux of Verdi's mastery of the operatic medium. His music reveals narrative context and character motivation in ways more profound than words alone. Indeed, this wrong key of D-flat minor, a deviation from standard tonal grammar, at once present but conventionally erroneous, reinforces Violetta's insider-outsider status. She is simultaneously beloved and objectified, irredeemable until on her deathbed. Verdi's music underscores his deep sympathy for Violetta's inherent goodness, and the music's key relationships witness her struggling with innocence lost, the precarious social consequences of her profession, and sanctioned love just out of reach.